21st to order. Good evening, everybody. As allowed by Iowa Code Section 21.8, tonight's meeting is being held electronically. And if you wish to provide input on any item, you may do so as a video participant by going to zoom.us/j/826-593-023. Or you can telephone on a toll-free number, 888-475-4499, and enter Zoom meeting 826-593-023, and that information can be found on the top of our agenda, which is posted online. Before we get started, I just want to extend our deepest condolences and recognize the passing of a civil rights pioneer in terms of Congressman John Lewis of him, and our deepest condolences are extended to his family, to those he represented, and to the entire Black community in our state, our community, and our nation. And, he was a amazing individual. I know he'd be sorely missed. So. All right, tonight we have two items on the agenda. The first is a workshop regarding multifamily component of 321 State Street. And just to restate for the public, no final council decision will be made at this meeting. We had hoped long ago to be able to have a face-to-face meeting with this, but given the fact that the COVID pandemic continuing to, just plain continuing, and council deciding to continue electronically, we want to move this project forward. So this evening, after the ways to proceed, we're first going to ask Kelly to go ahead and open the discussion by giving us some background on the issue, and then allow council to ask him any questions that they may have. Then we will open up this evening the meeting for public input for anyone who wants to address council. And we will endeavor to review for you what the process is to make sure that you have the opportunity to address council. And then we'll close the agenda item by asking Kelly to respond to some of the input ideas that were offered, and also summarize what our next steps are going to be, with the idea or with the objective of next Tuesday night, council giving specific direction to staff on how to proceed with this particular item. So with that overview, Kelly, I'll turn it over to you and let you take it away from here.
I also have Vanessa here tonight, and Justin is also with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa to do the introduction for the item. And the rest of us will just be here for responding to questions and comments after Vanessa is done with the presentation. So Vanessa, go ahead and take it away.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight, we laid out some background information that led us up to tonight, which began back in December 17th, when you directed us to proceed with creating a development concept for the single-family homes along 321 State Avenue that's now being called Baker Subdivision, and looking at options for doing affordable multifamily housing as well on that site. And then we came back in January and we kind of laid out what the time frame would look like for applying for low-income housing tax credit for that site, preparing an RFQ, doing proposals, reviewing, and council selection, refining it, trying to meet the deadline for the IFA application award in March of 2021. We noticed they would be putting that award out this coming August. Next notice of award would be next August 2021. And so with the above information, we were also directed to meet with the city staff.
Excuse me, Vanessa, let me just jump in here. Would everyone please mind muting their microphones so we don't have distractions in the background? Thank you. All right, Vanessa, please continue.
Okay, we also, prior to looking at doing an RFP, we met with the neighborhood that surrounds this site. And we had also moved forward with hiring civil design engineering to prepare the concepts, planning, design, and specifications for the site. Along with working with CDA, we came up with 6 concept designs that we presented to the neighborhood association and surrounding property owners, and brought those concepts back to council. And then at the February 25th council meeting, we shared those concepts, and the council by general agreement selected concept F, which proposed to have single family homes that would be located on the north side of the subdivision, which would leave the south side available for multifamily rental housing. However, at that meeting, council directed us to go ahead and proceed with developing the north side and leaving the south side available, and setting aside discussion again with the neighborhood about the multifamily concept at the July meeting. So that brings us up to where we are tonight and discussing the concept of low-income tax credits on the south side of the subdivision. And also attached to your report, we've given you an overview of the site that shows the concept for where the single family was, the low income family, multifamily options, and the single family along Wilmouth. And we also reattached the low income housing tax credit program that we presented to the neighborhood back at all of our meetings, that kind of gave a really detail on how the tax credit program works, along with some Q&As about that program. And so now we're at the point of ready to have that discussion. And I also attached the 2020 income guidelines that we just received from HUD, that lays out what the guidelines are for per family size at the 80 down to the 30% income levels. So now we're at the point tonight is to bring that discussion to you along with the neighborhood regarding what the development of the multifamily would look like on the south side of the subdivision.
So for the workshop, what council really is here is to hear comments from the neighborhood. I think council is also probably going to ask us some questions, and from there, staff will put together a draft RFP for your review on the 28th, which is next week. And so our goal is to have an understanding broadly of what council is expecting, so we can put an RFP together. Staff is advocating that the RFP be very broad in what's allowed for someone to propose. That way we'll be able to entice more proposals and have council have a chance to review multiple choices as they finally select a developer to partner with for the LIHTC side of the project. And that's really the end of our presentation for the night. So I think we're sending it back to you, Mr. Mayor, to have council comments and then also public participation.
Thank you, Vanessa and Kelly. Any questions for staff before we open up to public input?
I do have a question.
All right, David.
We've heard a lot of interest from the neighbors on a lease to buy concept for the site. So I wonder if you could tell us what you know about that in terms of how well it fits into the IFA's guidelines, and particularly if you could address what impact, if we were to want to pursue a lease to buy program, what impact would it have on the type of housing that would be practical, and the density, the number of units that could be created under that sort of scheme?
I will start. I did back last fall, went and visited some of the sites that had the low income tax credit rent to own properties. I looked at one in Bondurant, and I looked at also 2 in Des Moines. And it's certainly an eligible criteria under the low income tax credit program. The project in Bondurant was all single family homes, just like just like single family homes, but they were rent to own. And there was a management on site that was helping to make sure that maintenance was taken care of. They also was responsible for verifying eligibility and addressing any concerns, just like if it was multifamily housing. The sites in Des Moines were basically like duplexes or triplexes, where they rent to own each side of that, and they had management on site as well. So it certainly is a eligible activity under IFA. However, we're not sure what a developer would need to propose or how many, based on what the IFA guidelines would be, or how much land they would need to make it financially feasible for them to apply for that particular option under the IFA tax credit. So we don't know if that would be single family lots. We know that the area that we have right now is just over 2 acres, I believe, right, Kelly?
Justin, what was the number?
You're muted.
I think Justin's muted.
Sorry about that. The size of the parcel right now is approximately 3 acres.
Right. So they would have to kind of, if we went out for the RFP, we can request it, that they look at that and determine whether that would look like, how many single family homes that would be, or how many maybe duplexes that would be rent to own, and give us an idea of what they think would be feasible and something that would be receive high marks in getting IFA tax credits.
So David, the only other thing that I can probably add is in terms of how many housing units could fit on that south piece of property, if the only land is available is that 3-acre outlot. When we first showed concepts with CDA back in February, if it was just single family homes on a public street, we had 12 lots. So if that's the starting point about normal lots, cul-de-sac street, we're probably talking somewhere in the 12. If you do duplexes, maybe 18. So 12 to 18 is probably the max that you could physically fit in a kind of a public street configuration. And any other kind of configuration would be really hard for us to speculate on how a developer would look at that and what they would expect in terms of a kind of a site configuration at this point.
So could you compare that to the targets that you roughly have in mind for multifamily construction?
I think if it's multifamily, and I think we're very confident that council is thinking it's 3 stories or less, stories or 3 stories, maybe a mix. I think it's pretty. I'm just looking at my notes here just a second. I think we can easily comfortably fit 40 units into a multiple smaller buildings. It wouldn't require a large single building to do that. So you could think more along a medium density, kind of 2 to 3 story building in an FSRM or an RM zoning district. If you want to increase density and think of it more as a larger building, then yeah, we could get more units on the property with 2 larger buildings, more like an RH zone site.
And
Thanks.
what would a duplex or triplex setup, how many would that get us
That's where I think it's pretty speculative, because are you talking about making them on standard lots, or having all of their own access and parking on their lots? Are we talking about common area to serve some of these things? I think it's really hard for staff to probably project that out. It's hard for me to say, probably more than 18 units if you're looking at fairly standard configurations with a public street.
and a more creative configuration with common space more, I assume, than 18, a few more?
I would guess so, but then you have to factor in that once you start to put the common area improvements in and the private facilities, once they sell, you're going to have an HOA then to manage the property, manage the private streets, manage the common areas. So I'm not sure how a developer would look at that. If that's something that they would want to propose, that there's a common interest development in a lease to own configuration or not. That's something we don't know at this point.
Sure. Well, and I'm sorry, I don't know how it works, but Vanessa, the sites you visited, you mentioned they both had an on-site manager. Is that someone who lives there or just works there, Monday through Friday? I don't know how that works. I'm sorry.
On the complex in Bondurant, they just had an office. I don't think it was staffed 24/7. I think she just had office hours every day. The one in Des Moines, I think, was the same concept. They didn't live in the complex. They just had office space and office hours, and then maintenance staff as well.
Vanessa, do you remember the scale of the Bondurant project? How many homes there were?
Oh my goodness. It was at least 50.
So their acres to start were much greater.
Right, and it was abutting one side was budding market rate homes, and then there was an area that was just land as part of, I don't know how big the subdivision was when they started out, because it was done in several phases.
Sure.
And then they had elderly properties on that site as well. So they had a combination of everything.
Oh, I see. And then the duplex, triplex one you visited in Des Moines, how many, or what was the size of that relative to what we have?
Well, the one site seemed to be almost, I would think, might be comparable to what we have now that's available, because they were very close together, like driving into a complex itself. So they wasn't really spread out, but they were townhomes that were put together, and the site was quite smaller.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify our terminology, especially for those people who may be attending who are not used to this, when we're talking about multifamily by our ordinance, we're talking about something larger than a duplex. Is that correct?
Yeah, so multifamily housing is 3 or more units connected in a building that are not on an individual lot.
Thank you.
And I have this in front of me. If we're talking about the Des Moines Greystones project, it had 26 4-bedroom homes in it.
And I think most of those were configured as duplexes, at least the ones that I saw when I was doing research on that.
So a related question, if we went with multifamily, excuse me, and the units were configured as condominiums could be rented, or you could have some kind of rent to own structure with those. Is that a possible configuration in one of these housing programs?
I think conceptually it is. It's probably a question of whether a developer, we're talking about condos where you have somebody living above you and below you and to the side, or are we talking about where you're just sharing a wall, much like a townhome?
Well, if we were looking at trying to increase the density, if the single family homes and the duplexes and triplexes probably aren't going to achieve the desired density that's needed in order to get the desired number of units. And so it would seem logical to at least consider an apartment style building, but that created, Kelly, you're very fluent in this with the work that you're doing, just configure it as condominium units rather than as an apartment building. And same issues of having an HOA. And so theoretically, some people might be renting the units and some might be on a rent to own type of approach.
I don't think that we know whether a developer would propose stacked condominiums as a lease to own option. I don't think either of us is familiar with that example. I don't know that it's precluded by the rules. I just don't think we've seen it.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a couple more questions. So first, when you initially you said that you're intending to issue a very broad RFP. Is it fair to say then that the RFP would, due to its broadness, include the possibility of lease to buy, or is that something that you think needs to be called out separately? Does it change what you had in mind?
If that's something that council's interested in, since it's not the average proposal that gets put in for this program, I think we would want to identify that we're willing to consider that proposal.
That makes sense. And also, I've read about the way that lease to buy or rent to buy works under LIHTC is that it would require a 15-year so-called compliance period of rental before purchase. And then in the 16th year, the participants would become eligible to apply for purchase. Is that along the lines of what you're familiar with? Or I'm not sure what the Iowa rules are.
That's somewhat familiar with it. I'm not able to access my notes from when I visited the bond to rent, because that was my question. Because if they started out like on the Section 8 program and then work their way up income-wise and have a chance to be offered the opportunity to purchase it, and then also if they moved out before that time frame and someone else moved in, would they have that same time frame, or would they start over? I have to go back and research that. I'm sorry I didn't get to do that before the meeting tonight as to how that really works. But I know at a point that they're offered the opportunity to purchase it and given some avenues of which to go out and seek financing to do so.
But still, it sounds like there would be a substantial period of many years that it is run as a rental, right? I mean, you have to have some years as a rental as part of the whole system.
Yes.
Thank you.
As I recall, the Des Moines Greystones did have a 15-year lease period before the offer to buy could be made.
Yeah, the 15-year we're pretty confident is a minimum requirement.
Right. Because a lot of the tenants may be on the Section 8 program when they start.
And part of this comes back to that it needs to be a rental property and generate income for the tax credits to be valuable. I mean, there's components here beyond just about how this all works together and for someone. And there's different developers. Some take a fee and walk away. Some own and operate. There's a lot of different factors when you start to review the individual projects to get awarded every year. There's not one formula that works every year for one type of development.
Do we have any sense at all of whether a developer who might respond to an RFP is more likely to respond to one that's very directive or very open?
I don't think I do. Vanessa, do you have any feel for that?
Well, I was putting my feelers out today, trying to find, developers who had participated in the application round. And it seems sometimes it changes based on what IFA's point system is, whether that would be they're looking, when they look at the market, because IFA also looks at the community on which the application is coming from to determine what the need is before, as a developer might submit an application. So if they show that the need is for more low-income rental housing or something like that, they take in account that when they look at the application. So having it broad will give us an opportunity to just see if the interest is all multifamily style, or if that could be an interest in the lease to own style. We would know that more from the developer than we would trying to guess either way.
Thank you.
Vanessa and I were talking about this afternoon. I think the hard part is the developer wants to know what we want so they can put their best proposal forward. at the same time, I think we're willing to consider multiple ideas, so we want to be open. There's a fine line to probably walk there about making it somewhat predictable, but not foreclosing good ideas.
Well, I had a question sort of related to that, and that's how do you weigh, like, what are the criteria that we're going to weigh these either proposals on? Or, yeah.
Well, certainly we're going to be looking at the developer's background and experience and portfolio and all of those types of things. The other criteria, we would offer feedback to you, and you can also give us feedback to add to what that scoring criteria should also include. Whether or not they've done lease to own would be a criteria. And certainly we can fine tune that when we bring you the RFP.
I think for staff, our number one criteria is the likelihood that they can successfully secure the LIHTC credits, because we've been working on this for so long, and it's no guarantee that we're going to get it next spring, but we want to definitely work with someone that has a lot of experience on and has successfully navigated the process in the past, regardless of unit type.
Yeah, Kelly, I really appreciate that. This whole discussion of lease to own has come up relatively late in the process, and I worry a little bit that if this becomes now some kind of condition for the development, that will paralyze us. And so I think our first priority is to get the project done. If there's some flexibility to look at a rent to own, why not have more options than fewer options? But I want to make sure that we don't so constrain this RFP, we find ourselves talking to ourselves at the end of it.
Is number of units, would that be a factor that you're using to, I mean, that sounds like one of the factors we'd use to weigh those proposals.
You mean total affordable housing units produced on the site?
Yeah, or I mean, is that just a part of the likelihood that they can secure LIHTC?
I think for staff, we didn't have a density goal per se. I think we've always said you need to have enough space that a viable project can be proposed. But we didn't necessarily have a density goal in mind that we really need to get to beyond what's viable in the market.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions for staff before we open up public input?
I just want to add, I believe I can go and check and see what previous scoring criteria from IFA have been and past LIHTC applications, and then we can bring that forward to you as well.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and open up public input. And Brian, are you going to be running that?
I can do that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Do you want to review with everybody how they register that they want to address council, the process?
Sure. So what we'll do is if you're attending the webinar Zoom meeting, if you press the raise your hand button on the screen, and I'll one by one select someone to allow them to speak, and I'll let you know who I'm picking so that you can do that. And then if you've called in, I believe it's *9 is also the raise hand function if you have a call-in phone number. There's one attendee that's on the phone. The rest of them appear to be online.
Okay.
And can I ask, is the raise your hand button, is that visible on the screen for everyone, or do they have to do something in order to show it?
So my screen is different than their screens, but my memory is that either you right click or there's a button on the bottom of the bar that's your hand.
Thanks.
Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. And I would ask people to go ahead and limit their comments to 3 minutes if they would. And each person has one opportunity to address council, so we don't have multiple addressing by one person tonight. So go ahead, and Kelly.
So I'm just waiting for an attendee to raise their hand so I can pick somebody.
Okay. And for those that may be interested in addressing council, we need to introduce yourself, your name, and your address before you begin speaking.
All right, so I have Tony and Debbie Ramey is the first one. So you are now unmuted. You have to unmute yourself after I do that, though. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yep, how's that?
Better.
Okay. Yeah. When Joanne Pfeiffer mentioned the Greystones project, that was the first time that.
Excuse me, Tony, would you introduce yourself and your address, please? And then you go ahead and start.
Thank you. I forgot to do that. Tony
Okay.
Ramey at 425 Hilltop Road.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. In reply to Tim Garton's comment, I just wanted to say that when Joanne Pfeiffer contacted me a few days ago about the Greystones project, that was the first example I had heard of or seen where you could actually combine LIHTC funds with a rent-to-own project. So that is often a partial explanation of why it's such a late entry into the game. And I'm further encouraged by the fact that Vanessa is now saying they also have such a project that's happened in Bondurant. So it sounds like there's a precedent for doing this. And I just think it would bode well for both the city and the neighborhood if we could make that paradigm work.
I also wanted to add a comment.
This is Debbie Ramey, same address.
Same address, but I'm having a hard time following because there's a use of a lot of acronyms and I'm not following half of what you're talking about. So is there any way that you could speak in such a way that it's, I don't know, more helpful to the local peon, I guess? I don't know. Anyway.
We'll try to do that when we're talking to make sure there's context.
I think that's all we had. Thank you.
Before you go, Tony and Debbie, what specifically, Debbie, what acronyms were used that we can go ahead and clarify those for you?
I heard RFP, IFA, and I know medium density and low density, and I've heard those before, but those words keep flipping back, RFP, and then some of the, there's other ones, but those are the ones I wrote down right now.
Okay, when we get down public input, I'll ask staff to clarify what RFP, IFA, the densities, and LIHTC are, and then we'll try and make sure that we catch those if they're used.
And then in the funding, when they talk about funding, then they, throw out all these different packages, and there's just, it's very confusing.
Okay, we'll try to get that clarified for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'll just address three of those up front because they're kind of basic. So IFA is the Iowa Finance Authority. They're a state agency that is responsible for reviewing and awarding the low-income housing tax credits. The low-income housing tax credits are the LIHTC that we're talking about. So the city has to make an application with a partner to the state. We can't control necessarily that we get awarded these tax credits, which is a financing tool to help lower the cost of producing affordable housing. So we want to partner with someone that can put a good application together and be competitive at the state level, because it's a competitive program across the whole state, and there's more requests than there is money every year.
Sure.
So that's what we're talking about. And to find a developer, an RFP is a request for proposals. So in the RFP, a developer will identify themselves and outline details of a proposal of what they would like to pursue in partnership with the city.
Thank you.
I think those three things are pretty basic, and we probably all need to understand what that means to move on.
Maybe just clarify when you say medium density or high density, what does that mean, Kelly, in general term?
Yeah, so low, medium, and high are broad residential descriptions of density and uses in the city. So low density is from 0 to about 7 units per acre, housing units per acre. Medium density then goes from roughly 7 or 10 up to 20, 22 units per acre. And then high density stretches all the way up to 40 units per acre if that was a project. So in this general area, you have a sampling of really all three of those. To the west on Trip, you have some townhomes and you have some small apartment buildings that are medium density. And then along Lincoln Way, you do have some RH, some higher density apartment building projects as well.
And low density would be?
It's a mix of, typically it's single family, one single family home or a 2-family / duplex home. Those are also allowed in medium density, but essentially those are the 3 types of things that you would see.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right, so the next speaker is Sheila Riggs.
Unmute now. This is Sheila Riggs from 405 South Wilmeth. And thank you all, first of all, for all your public service. I know you put in a lot of hours on behalf of Ames, and I want to appreciate and thank that. Congressman or City Councilman Martin, can you say a little bit about how Ames distributes housing for low-income families evenly across all the wards? Thank you.
Okay, Sheila, thank you for that question. And I think what we'll do is we'll take that question and we'll let staff potentially answer that to the best of their ability. So I think the question you said is how is low-income housing distributed across all the different wards in the city? Is that correct?
That is correct. That's the question.
Okay, Sheila, thank you. Anything else to say?
Nope. Just trying to get on and off mute here.
All right. Thank you, Sheila. Appreciate it very much.
Okay, I'm looking for another person to raise their hand.
Wait, who's going to answer that?
Oh, it will be answered, Sheila. I want to get all the public input first, and staff will circle back and answer the question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Jan Flora has his hand raised. All right, Jan, go ahead. And
There we go. Yeah, thank you. I'm at 1902 George Allen Avenue in Ames, and I'm a member of Amos. And I like the direction of the discussion tonight, and I particularly like the idea of rent to own, and hopefully people could begin accumulating their equity in the home from the very beginning, and I think that would contribute to a good deal of stability of the people who were renters. And I had one other question about an acronym, and that was the HOA.
Okay. Anything else, Jan?
I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Kelly, while you're waiting for someone else to raise their hand, do you want to go ahead and answer the HOA? And then also, if you're still waiting, we can try and get around to Sheila's question too.
So I have some other hands, so I'll answer the HOA. HOA is a homeowners association. So in modern development, if there's features of a project that are shared amongst more than one property owner, then you typically form a homeowners association to deal with the general upkeep and maintenance of common features, which could be a private street, it could be a parking lot, it could be a stormwater area. It could be a lot of different things. If you just have a public street and a standard lot, then you wouldn't necessarily need an HOA to administer features in the project. All right, so the next one is, I believe it's Marilyn Clemm. Okay, Marilyn, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself to speak. There you go. You got it.
We've been at this a long time. Are we all tired of it? I am. I'm not in favor of high rise over there in that area. We got 4 or 5 high rises up there on Lincoln Way that was Breckenridge put in there. We also have 70% rental property. How many years ago was it said we were going to have 5 houses built on Wilmot? Have you even got anybody to build those houses, buy those houses? Haven't seen a thing. How long is it going to be before any of those houses are going to be built? I don't want to see any rental property up there. Sorry to say, you know, I am a rental person myself. My sister lives next door to me, and they do a lot of work with me around both houses, and we keep them pretty nice. The rental properties, especially on South Franklin, is a disaster. Try Trip After at the white picket fence place. I'd like to see our neighborhood be beautified. I don't think a high-rise apartment complex would be the trick. Like in my letter to you guys, I said that if I have to take rental property, it would rent to own, and it would not be a high-rise. It may be row houses. Try that one. That's all I got to say. Talk at you later.
Thank you, Marilyn. Appreciate it. Kelly, or Vanessa, Marilyn asked a question about when our houses are going to get built along Wilmuth. Can you, when we get done, just give her an update on that too?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I don't see any other hands raised right this minute.
Okay, let's do this. Let's go ahead and answer a couple of questions. See if
Hold on. Just hold on a second. Here's one.
Okay.
Mike Petersen.
All right.
Okay, Mike, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, Mike.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just have one basic question. If any of you on the council or the mayor happen to, if you were living in our neighborhood, do you think that, and considering that we are 70% rental and already overloaded with rental, do you think you would feel the same, or do you think you'd be voting in favor of having the, multifamily apartment building?
Okay.
That's my question.
Okay. Do you have an address, Mike? I'm sorry, you need to offer that to us.
3302 Morningside Street.
Thank you. Anything else?
That's it.
All right. Thank you.
Quick for me.
We've got somebody else asking.
Yeah.
Well, it's still going to come on mine.
I know, but that's okay.
Just introduce yourself, Joanne.
Tell them that.
Joanne Pfeiffer wants to ask a question. She's working with my computer.
Sure, that's fine. Go ahead, and we'll start you over, Joanne. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the conversation. And I am very happy to say all of you read all the letters that came in, those 12, 15 letters. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So the mayor just said, yes, they all read them. So I feel so good that you've got a lot of the messages already. Does anybody have questions about the letters?
Let me clarify. let me clarify, Joanne. I am sure everyone got them. I can't speak for everybody, but I know that council is committed to reading all the emails. So I think I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. So I am confident that we take seriously the input that we get by email. And Joanne, we appreciate your efforts and you being representative for the CCAMOS. Council, do you have any questions for Joanne while she's on the line?
Thank you.
I don't see any right now, Joanne. Thank you, and thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, I don't see it.
I think you already got it muted.
Yeah, I think it's already. Okay.
You're still live, Michael. There you go.
I got it.
And Aaron, I think you probably have, since Joanne and Marilyn have spoken before, I think you probably have their addresses. Is that correct?
Yes, I can find them.
Thank
we
you.
can get them if we need to. They're on Morningside.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Just wait a second right now. I don't see anybody. So if there's another attendee that would speak that hasn't spoken yet.
Okay, let's go. While you're doing that, maybe Vanessa could answer, or while we're waiting, I think we'll just keep the public forum open for a few minutes. Vanessa, do you want to comment on the question that was posed about how is low-income housing distributed across the wards?
Well, if you're talking about subsidized housing that we have across the city, some of them have been here longer than I, but usually developers, similar to what we do now, they either get funding from the Iowa Finance Authority or the Iowa Economic Development or directly from HUD to build housing, and developers may have already owned the land in Ames, or they come into the Planning and Housing Office to find out what areas are available for development of multifamily housing. When you apply for housing for low-income families, usually it has to be in a place where they have access to medical, food, grocery, and transportation. So that also determines where developers look at to best build housing that meets that criteria to be funded to build the low-income housing units. So that's why they're kind of spread over the community.
Can you just highlight for everybody, and I think it was in the staff report, but just maybe a refresher, where are some of the projects that currently are in Ames?
Okay, specifically where the tax credit apartments are on Tripp Street, Windsor Point. There are some on South 16th that are Laverne apartments. Those are the two tax credits I think that are left. There were more than that, but the tax credits run out, so they've been converted to market rate housing. For subsidized housing funded by HUD, we have apartments for families and elderly on East 7th Street. We have apartments for just the elderly out on Regency Court and on Allen Wheeler and on Stonehaven.
So it sounds like the location is determined as much by land availability than it is trying to target locations within certain wards, and the wards can change every 10 years anyway, correct?
Correct. And then that does not include families that are receiving Section 8 assistance that's spread out all over the community.
Thank you.
So Vanessa, is this site the first time the city has tried to show initiative in pursuing a light tech project?
Yes, with partnering with a developer. Normally developers could come in and just make an application, but IFA has kind of changed their guidelines where they have to show that they have gotten approval and that the city is willing to partner to allow it to happen or to partner with them. That rule has been added over the years. Before they could just come in and find the land and apply and build it. but IFA has changed those requirements that they have to work more with the community.
So we haven't had a LIHTC project be built in the city of Ames in, I think, almost 8 years. So Laverne Apartments on South 16th Street was the last affordable housing project built in the city.
And there was some effort to try and do something across the street north of City Hall, but that land was not large enough. Is that correct?
That was, yeah. So that was our first effort, was to try and find a LIHTC developer to do around a 10-unit project. And the feedback we got was that wasn't viable. And that was what, 4 years ago, Vanessa?
Yeah, 4 to 5.
Okay. And then we purchased this property almost 5 years ago with CDBG funds for the express purpose of being able to pursue affordable housing on the site. And that was we bought it with affordable housing funds for this purpose. So it's something that we've known all along is necessary. There's a lot of choices in how it's done, but it is a requirement to have affordable housing.
Vanessa, I have a question. It's been a while since we've looked at it, but if I remember correctly, the last couple of impediments to fair housing studies that we've done have shown that we have a need for affordable rental housing. Is that correct?
Yes, the cost of housing and the availability of housing has it's always been our highest two impediments that we faced in the community. And this last impediment study, I think it was just the reverse. It's usually availability and cost. I think this past year it was cost over availability.
Thanks.
But they both were 1 and 2.
Okay, public comment is still open. Is there anybody else, Kelly, who wants to address council? All right, we'll go ahead and close public comment and proceed on.
Mayor, I think there was a question that Marilyn asked about when are we going to start developing housing on Wilmouth. Right now we are hired CDA and we've got the final platting approved and the lot layout for the single family on the north. So we're hoping that on the next council meeting on the 28th, we'll be bringing the plans and specifications to start putting in the infrastructure for the lots on the north side.
And hopefully they'll maybe break ground on building houses sometime this year. Is that correct? Or early next year?
Well, that's certainly a possibility, sir.
Very good. Anybody else, Kelly, who wants to address council that you see?
I'm not seeing any of their hands raised.
Okay. You'll go ahead and close public input, and council, Mike Petersen posed a question. If you were living in their neighborhood, would you consider anything that you're voting on tonight? And I'm not going to ask people directly to answer that question, but if you feel so inclined to offer a comment, you're welcome to do so as we wind this conversation up tonight. Okay. Other questions for staff or follow up as a result of the public input this evening?
I have a question following up on Amber's point. Once the units are no longer in the low income rental status, at what point do they shift then to market value rental?
Well, the one example that I can give you were the apartments on Arbor, on the corner of Sheldon, Arbor Street Apartments. Those were Section 8 project-based units that was built initially. They had a 20-year affordability period that they had to remain available to very low income. And once that term was up, they were converted into student housing. So depending on the program that you're receiving, the developers apply for, is going to have that stipulation period, whether it's 15, 20, 25, and some have had 30.
I think our understanding is that because of the competitiveness of the program, a rental project is expected to be affordable for 30 years if they get awarded. So the tax credits don't last that long, but the program's so competitive, people have to offer up a longer period of time to be affordable than the length of the tax credits. So I think we expect that if you do a rental product here, it will be affordable for 30 years, which is a really strong effort to get affordable housing that's low income designated for that purpose into the community.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see anybody else indicating interest in wanting to discuss this further with or questions for staff. So Kelly, you want to go ahead and just summarize what the input ideas were this evening and where you want us to go and what we should anticipate decision-wise coming up in next week.
Well, I think I guess based on the conversation, I think we need to know if council wants to entertain options for both standard rental property and also the lease to own. I think it'd be good to get a direction on that because that would affect the structure of the RFP, how we set that up, that you have two options as the developer of what to propose. And I think just kind of listening to all the conversation, I believe that, and this is where I need to be corrected if I'm wrong, if we don't have a goal for a certain number of units on the property, I think what we're saying is we think the design attributes are more important and that we would probably want to articulate to the developer that responds that its appearance from the street as probably a smaller scale building is important to us. And if that's the case, I think we'd want to articulate some idea about that into the RFP. We wouldn't dictate necessarily exactly a building type. If that's the case, I guess council should tell us that also. So there's a couple of things here that would help us put it together for next week. Probably the most important though is whether we can have it broadly based for rental and lease to own, or whether there's a focus on one or the other.
So staff is asking for some direction. This is not a final decision on which direction to go, but you want to know what interest from an RFP standpoint we're looking for, so that you can begin to craft an RFP in that specific direction, so it could be discussed further and voted on next Tuesday night. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay,
so let's take them one at a time then. So you had an issue on density.
I think the first question, yes, we had in general or lease to own, we're getting feedback somewhere. The second one is there a goal for the number of units on the property, or is it more about the design elements? Meaning, is it essentially a 2-story, or is it a townhome appearing project from the street?
From my perspective, well, first of all, I'd just like to say I like the idea of the rent to own. And if I like that idea because it helps families to build up some wealth that they can capitalize on in the future, then I think by saying that, I am buying into the idea of lower density. Although I think duplexes or triplexes makes more sense to me than single family homes. So I don't think it's just about, what something looks like from the street, but also the value of the investment growing for those families that get into that rent to own situation. And I would just like to address Mike Petersen's question. I live on a street that's 83% rental. And in my neighborhood, I have actually been happy to see some rental houses taken down for higher density apartments, which I think can be managed better than single family homes in some cases. So that's my response to Mike. Thanks for asking.
And I do want to, for maybe not everybody's been tracking this project as long as many of us, the single family subdivision that is to the north and along Wilmouth, those are to be sold as ownership opportunities with at least 50% going towards low income families as well. And I think Vanessa mentioned that depending on how those are funded, there might be a rental component there too. We might be ourselves, the city, doing a lease to own program to make that possible also. So there's an element that's going to be on this site that's ownership housing, regardless of whether the LIHTC component includes that or not.
So I appreciate the way you set the table on this, Kelly. Amber has, from day one, has raised the point about the need for low-income rental housing, and this is something Vanessa has helped us to as well. So it's not a question of whether philosophically we like the idea of someone being able to rent and eventually that becoming an ownership opportunity. And the question is that we're tasked with this through for this particular project. Do we see low-income housing as low-income rental housing as a big component, given the fact that we don't do much of this in the community? I think that needs to be the philosophy that drives our conversation.
Kelly, is it true if it would seem that left to the, if there was no direction given to a developer that either you're trying to minimize the massiveness of a building for sake of discussion, or they don't want to see just one big building dropped in the center. If that is not clarified, then a developer is probably going to try and maximize his return on investment. He's going to try and get as many units as possible and try and get as many LIHTC credits as possible from a standpoint of just, it's not wrong, but just trying to maximize his return on investment. Would that be an accurate statement?
I think they're going to ask immediately, what's the zoning on the property, so they know what they're working with. And we're doing it backwards. We're going to rezone the property to fit the project type. So whether it's a PRD or medium density, that's something that we'll do as a result of picking a developer. So they're going to ask, and I think they're going to approach the site and say, what's the most efficient building I can build to lower my cost of construction? And then also there is a cap on where it makes sense, from what we understand, on how many they build, because the tax credits don't scale necessarily all the way up. There's a limit on how much money you can have per project. So they wouldn't come in with really, really high density because it won't scale with the project. So I think we would say that the standard project would probably be one or two large 3-story buildings, depending on the units. If we say we want 2-story buildings or smaller buildings in the medium density, they'll approach it that way and do that. I think that's not really a problem for them. They just need to know what they're working with and how they made the proposal and how the pro forma comes together.
What would be the risk of being more constrained? Is it possible you would not get any responses and we just have to square one again?
I think that in terms of constraint, the only one I would view as probably so severe that we may not get any responses if the only thing that we're proposing on is the lease to own option because of the small size of the site. I don't know that there's enough viability there for 15 houses to motivate anybody to do it.
And the city has experience with that just north of City Hall, correct?
And that's when we were talking about a rental only project, and it was in the 10 to 12 unit range, and it didn't work. So I think because we've narrowed the site down so much, it makes me a little more concerned about who's going to view it as a viable site. Because we sized it intentionally when we picked the south side to go towards a rental product, which we knew could fit. Because we talked about south versus north. North had more options. The south could be a smaller site. But it still fit the idea of a rental product. Now, the lease to own could also work, but I just don't know how many units it will yield. So that's my concern. If we do lease to own only, we may not get any proposals. I think if we're specifying we want a 2-story look or we want a townhome look up against the street, that's not going to dissuade people from proposing.
David?
Yeah, so just to weigh in on this, I think there's a lot to like about the lease to own idea, but also what's ringing in my ears is what you said earlier, Kelly, about how staff's #1 criteria probably is in partnering with the developer who will actually get this done. And so I don't see any reason to take lease to own off the table. I think we have to recognize that if it's just included as something that a developer is free to propose, then we might not get proposals along those lines that will be as engaging as the others. But so I don't want to rule that out. But I think that both should remain on the table, and we should be optimizing this in order to take advantage of this property that the city purchased for the purpose of affordable housing, and make sure that we can actually get something built there.
David, do you have a feeling with respect to, let's just say you had inviting proposals where one saying you want to look at multiple options from a developer if they so choose to, what would be the non-rent to own criteria that you would suggest being palatable to you?
You mean, for example, a density goal versus a design goal, that sort of thing?
Correct.
I'm not sure I have a preference in that regard. I think that it would come down to the whole package, and I can't predict in advance which would resonate better.
Just deferring to the developer to come up with something that would work well on the site, then.
I think so, yeah, and then staff will evaluate and will draw out the things that we have to pay attention to in each of these proposals, so that we kind of know what we're doing when we award one. But that's how I would approach it, I think. I do think that we have an advantage here in that it's an entirely new pocket of a neighborhood, and the views from the west part of the neighborhood will look similar to what they do now, although there'll be homes on Wilmouth instead of just an empty field or a middle school. But the area that we set aside, the 3 acres on the south side, that's really not going to be in anyone's sight lines, I believe, other than new construction. So I feel like I'm a little less sensitive about fitting that into sight lines of an existing neighborhood.
How about you, Rachel? I'm sure you've been thinking when listening through all this. What thoughts do you have?
Yeah, I tend to agree with David about keeping both options on the table and kind of seeing what proposals the developers come forward with. I wouldn't necessarily want to rule out rent to own either, just because a developer might not have as much of an incentive to do it. But I think it's pretty clear that we have a lot of community interest in a rent to own option, and so I think seeing both types of proposals would be beneficial.
Thank you. Rowan? Your thoughts?
Yeah, good question. I can see this both ways too. To answer the question about whether or not I'd put it in my own neighborhood, I think so, but I'm pretty prone to, I think that we're all trying to look at a bigger picture here, and that also involves like Amber's mentioned, the need for affordable rental. But also, I totally understand the point about building equity in something, and that is a method, that is the modern American method of maintaining wealth, and so it should be open to more people. So I get that too. But again, yeah, I think maybe seeing both options, and if we had a really glorious option for, I don't know what it would look like, medium density condo rent to own program, that would be good to see. So I'm kind of in that same boat, but again, I I can see the desire to get a project done too, because it's like Marilyn said, we have been batting this around for quite a while too. So I'm sensitive to that as well.
Other thoughts, Amber?
I'm supportive of keeping it flexible and allowing there to be options on the table. I'm a little skeptical that there would be interest from developers in a rent to own option just based on, a lot of the LIHTC projects that are awarded around the state over the last several years. But I'm fine if everyone wants to keep options open. I just think as we move forward, when we do hopefully receive several proposals, that we really remember the studies that we've done and what the needs in the community are and what our goals have been for as long as I've been on city council.
Okay. Gloria and Timmy both have offered input, but any other closing thoughts before we get a motion on the table? Gloria?
I'd just like to clarify, my comment was more in response to Kelly saying, what should it look like? I am absolutely in favor of looking at rental only or rent to own. My comment was mostly designed to say I'm not interested in rent to own single family homes, and that it has to be something that's higher density than that. And I would also say that I think we should be looking at maximum, setting a maximum height of 2 stories or 3 stories as opposed to 4 stories. So from that perspective, what it looks like, I guess, is important, because I don't think we need to go to buildings of that height to achieve some of the density that we might want to see.
Good point. Kelly, do you think, based on your little bit of your noodling, that if you stay with 2-story as a limitation on a height, that they could still get the density we're looking for, or not? Or is that not possible?
It's possible. We looked at. We've seen FSRM done with 2-story buildings. There's also 2.5-story buildings that could also probably make it work. For sure, 3. I don't think we need 4-story buildings here to get somebody's interest. I really don't. Somewhere between 2 and 3, I think, is workable.
So, is it possible for council to say strong preference for 2-story if that's their desire, but that 3-story would not be ruled out, and that would be the I'm trying to give you trying to help you have some ideas how to start framing this in.
Yeah, I think we could. I don't think we're going to have a hard and fast scoring system very easily, because we're not giving a lot of direction to somebody. I think what I'm hearing is we got to see it to know if we like it. So it's going to be kind of more qualitative guidance about what we would prefer to see. But so I think we can write that to say preference for 2-story compatible structures. Consider 3 stories for some building components or something like that. We could say that.
Okay. Tim, what are your thoughts? Closing thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of good comments. The only thing I would suggest, so this has been very interesting, that probably the earliest that someone could move into a rent to own status would be after 15 years. I wasn't aware of that. That's a very helpful thing to get a sense of the parameters. People who buy units like this, and again, the developer, as Kelly mentioned, might be buying and flipping or buying and holding, but whoever's going to buy this to hold is going to have a pro forma that is based upon a certain rental income stream coming off of this. And it won't work on the pro forma. I'm just going to make up a number. Let's say they have 20 units. If those units start spinning off because the tenants have purchased the units, then their pro forma won't work. And so they would have to somehow, I don't know how you would do this, calculate a certain percentage of those units spinning off and then trying to create the pro forma based on that, I think that'd be very difficult. So the point of this is either you do this as a purely rental structure, or you do this as a rent to own. But just know that that's going to dramatically change the pro forma of someone who has to make the revenues and expenses work out. But I'm in favor of seeing what the tide brings in for proposals and sort of assess things from there.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's get a motion that gives staff some kind of a direction with some clarity. I think we have some good idea where council's at, but again, this is just to kind of give them some direction on how to start framing in the proposal or RFP.
I thought that was on the 28th. In the staff report, it says it should be emphasized staff is not seeking any final council decisions at this workshop.
That is true. So, but we want to be productive in the next 5 days of giving you a draft RFP that we hope you would approve next Tuesday, rather than send us back and have to bring it back again in the middle of August to you. So if there's no direction tonight, we'll put together what we can and hope that we get it right for Tuesday. And if that, but anything we can get direction on will be definitely more productive for us.
And also we're looking at, getting your direction for next week as you see what we've laid out. But once we get that direction, that you will give us direction to go ahead and proceed without having to bring it back.
So Kelly or John, would it be helpful for us to make make motions looking at some of the specific aspects that represent our conversation tonight? So for example, I could make a motion on limiting the number of floors or stories of the buildings. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, anything like that is helpful to us. And then you won't be approving it tonight. I mean, next Tuesday, you'll see it in draft form and you'll accept the RFP, or you'll give us changes next Tuesday.
Well, then I would move that the draft RFP have a limitation on the units as being no more than 3-story units.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? So all you're doing, you're not saying you absolutely have to do this because you have a chance to change it for next week, but the point is we're trying to give some idea to staff so they can start framing this in and putting in some provisos. You're still going to see the RFP next week. And if you want to make changes, you can still make changes. But it just kind of helps them be efficient and use their time and have an idea where you want to head. Amber, do you have a comment or?
No. I have one question about the motion. Kelly, I think the way you phrased the option preference for 2-story with no more than parts of the building being 3-story, is that something that is written around a basic maximum 3 stories, or is that something that is a separate motion if we're interested in it?
I guess based on Tim's motion, it was pretty straightforward. To just say no more than 3. If there's something more specific, I think we need to see that as a motion. Or again, yeah, I guess however you guys want to go about doing this. And at the end of the day, I think you should understand that you are going to see every feature of this project. This is not something where council's going to say, go ahead and do something here, and the developer's only going to work with staff. Every component of these buildings is going to be reviewed by council. You are going to be very tight with the details on this because we're going to be partners, and it's not something that just staff and the developer are going to go do by ourselves. So you will have a lot of control on seeing what the actual buildings look like and what the details are.
Okay. Everyone understand the motion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried.
I'd like to make a second motion if I could. I thought Marilyn Clemm offered an important comment about the importance of the aesthetics of it. And so maybe a question first for Kelly. Is it possible that in the RFP, we could ask for an emphasis on aesthetics? Is there a way of articulating this, that we're not interested in a big box? We're interested in something that landscaping and with architectural features that would make the structures attractive. I think a fair question from Marilyn. Is there a way of doing that?
Yeah, I think we could put some more qualitative descriptions in about features that we think would make it a good design or compatible with its single family surroundings. Because it is, even though it's not necessarily abutting the existing neighborhood, it is abutting single family homes. So there's some common ways of dealing with that. And we can definitely articulate that in the RFP. So I move that we direct staff to include aesthetic elements as part of the RFP proposal.
Second.
Moved by Garten, second by Betcher. Any discussion?
And Tim, is that assuming that the aesthetic features are compatible with single family homes?
Well, I mean, Kelly indicated that was one factor. I'll leave it to staff to sort of think through how to articulate that. I guess I'm hoping for some broad language, landscaping, as well as the architectural features. Kelly, do you think enough guidance, or would it be helpful to have more specificity?
I think you should just see it next week. We'll take a stab at it. I think we all know we want a project we're going to be proud of, and to emphasize that over total yield is really all we need to know, and we'll work with somebody. Again, this is a competitive process, so I'm expecting something quality to come back to us, because they have to go through the QAP or the Iowa Finance Authority standards as well. And again, it's a competitive process. They need to put their best foot forward.
All right, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Any other motions regarding rent to own and or rental only?
I would move to express interest both in rent-to-own options and exclusively long-term rental options.
Second.
Moved by Martin, second by Betcher. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Anything else that you want to give direction to staff? Again, this is not a final decision, just kind of gives them some rails to run on, to get some ideas as they start drafting the RFP.
Would it be appropriate for us to encourage applicants who are interested in creative housing solutions?
Or is that just an assumed assumption?
Yeah, I don't know. Because I think we keep talking about that, but I don't know that developers are typically going to give that. I also don't know if it's something that IFA will value. I would love to see Vanessa's input on what the scoring system has looked like in the past. But I think we have mentioned that kind of creativity as something that we would value, not that it's, a make or break element, but something that is welcomed.
Can you tell me what creativity means to you?
Well, I don't know what creativity means to me. That's what it's being creative.
That word would become just a throwaway word, as saying we're looking for a quality creative project. It wouldn't mean anything without more specifics behind it. And I don't think IFA is concerned one way or the other about being creative. They do have building material requirements and certain design features, but I don't know that creative is a point in this system at all, or what it would mean. So I think we're pretty broad. I mean, we're saying you can propose rental buildings, you can propose ownership buildings, And the only limit right now is it's a 3-story building. So that's a pretty big box for someone to come in and be creative within, if that works for them.
And also that taking into account compatible design features that fit in with the neighborhood as well.
Right now it's about as wide open as, I'm comfortable that this is a fairly wide open approach with where we're at right now.
Okay. Any other motions? Otherwise, we're going to move on. Hearing and seeing none, thank you very much. And we are going to move on to the next item, which is resolution approving, denying, mandating masks to be worn in city buildings. Steve?
Yes, I think Deb's here to went over her staff report on this. 3 different categories: the buildings themselves, Cyride, I think he had some questions about, and I can let Deb go over the report if you'd like, or if you have any questions about that. He added some information just to clear up some misunderstanding on how we operationalize even masks in the building. I don't know if you saw that latest memo. I don't know if that was clear to you, because sometimes people think when they walk in, they're going to see everybody in City Hall wearing a mask, and we spent a lot of money to place people in bubbles, if you will, behind some protective glass materials. So you might see them not in a mask. But you have any questions? Barb Neal here is also to speak to Cyride. We've talked to them. I think the Cyride board has given her an indication of support for that, but Barb can talk about that.
I do have a question. May I?
Please, David.
Steve, if we were to proceed with one of the options that say require the wearing of face coverings in all city buildings, how would you merge that with what you just described, having to do with like creating bubbles within the building where currently you have different rules that apply?
No, Deb, you want to answer that? How we handle it?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that we could do is require everybody behind those plastic barriers to wear them at all times, or if a member of the public is not present or they're not assisting a customer at that time, they could remove that mask until the next customer comes up to the counter. The areas that would be most impacted by this, I would think, are utility customer service as you come into the front entryway of City Hall, the community center. That counter area has all plexiglass sneeze guards, and the library as well is pretty well surrounded by that plastic. And so right now, if staff choose to wear the face covering, even working behind those barriers, they certainly can. But we could require it all the time as long as they're behind that barrier, or as long as there's a customer that they're assisting or waiting on. We also have the barriers at various workstations throughout buildings, so the public may stop into the city manager's office or at planning and housing. They kind of already had those barriers up already, but the administrative assistants that sit behind those areas, could wear them when a customer is there, or wear them at all times. But those are really probably the 2 options.
So I guess the question for us is, are you seeking council direction to choose one of those options, or is that something that you would do on your own if we were to simply approve one of the options in the staff report stating that face coverings is required, and you'd figure out the rest?
Well, we just want to point out, when you say face guards are required, we're trying to say there are some times when people will walk in, they have to wear they walk into the building, they be wearing face guards and not see people behind the plexiglass in certain areas wearing a mask. So they may be confused and voice objection to that. Just want you to know that. So I'm not asking for direction. I'm telling you how we plan to do it, unless you have some objections to that.
Right. Thank you.
So I have a question, and this is mostly because I haven't set foot in City Hall since before all of this happened. So with regard to, let's just take utilities. The plexiglass is there between the employees and the customers. Is that right?
That's
Right.
correct.
Is there also plexiglass between employees? I guess one of the things I'm wondering about is, are our employees comfortable with the policy as it is now? Or are there people who would really prefer it if everybody in their bigger office was wearing a mask at work? Because the face or the plexiglass sounds like it's there mostly between employee and customer. Is that right?
That's correct. In those areas, it is in planning and housing where that kind of a structure is already in place. The administrative assistants are divided up, so there is a barrier between the administrative assistants. In the community center, it's more of an open area. And this was something that we talked to employees about when we were assessing the need for the plastic barriers. What was going to make most sense, where people were going to feel most comfortable. And at this point in time, again, if somebody wants to wear their face covering, more than what's required in our current policy for employees, they're certainly welcome to do that. I think at this point they're comfortable with how things are set up. If that were to change, they're always encouraged to let their supervisor know, so we can look at what other accommodations are out there.
We do have plexiglass separating some employees from each other, do we not?
We do.
And also, if you can't social distance, if you're in a big room together, you have to be social distance, not to wear a mask to meet the CDC guidelines.
So it would be possible if let's say we went with option one. If we were to do that, is it possible then for employees who perhaps have changed their minds since they were asked previously about whether they're comfortable with the arrangements, for them to come to their supervisor and say, I would really prefer it if everyone who is sharing this space is wearing masks?
I could certainly do that.
Mm-hmm. And would that then be enough to require masks?
Well, I haven't decided that. We haven't talked about that yet, but we'd certainly discuss that. I think they have to be protected and feel safe and social distance. We can certainly set that criteria up if you want to. One person can dictate the whole area, but each space is so unique that I think we want to look at it. So far, no one said that, but we certainly can discuss that.
You told us, and maybe you've told us before, and I'm sorry if it's written somewhere. What happens if an employee at City Hall tests positive?
They're required, Bronwyn, to stay home. They talk with HR. Information is gathered about other individuals that they've been in contact with. So we kind of do our own contact tracing, if you will, so that we can properly notify other people who could be impacted by the positive test. The person's work area is cleaned and disinfected. If it's depending on where the work area is, a larger part of that area could be also cleaned and disinfected. And then the person's at home until their symptoms have subsided, or they've met that 10 to 14 day window under the CDC guidelines and can return to work.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my understanding that everything has been set up in City Hall for the staff, where you follow CDC guidelines. Is that correct?
Right.
Mm-hmm. But if council wanted if it was decided all employees need to wear masks at all time, regardless of what's been set up, that would exceed the CDC guidelines based on your understanding of what's been set up right now. So every attempt has been made to protect every staff member.
Right.
Because that was actually being set up when they were still working in the City Hall.
Yeah. But let me make it
opening it, right?
Let me be clear. When people walk in from the outside, we're asking to have masks on. You understand, as we walk through the halls too, we have to have masks on. So I want you to think that we're not requiring masks by city employees. Think of them once they settled in by themselves in their own location. If you get up and go into a conference room, you're gonna have the mask on as you move through the city hall, or as you walk out into a more public area.
John, Steve, I have a question. So when we think about City Hall in particular, and I'd like to have a similar answer with respect to the library, is it possible to make an estimate on the percentage of people that are coming into City Hall now without a mask? So we're looking at a proposal
right,
solving a problem, and I'd like to understand how big the problem is.
Okay, well, I can't give you that data, how many people come in without a mask, but based on feedback, we do offer masks to people come in. 100% of the people either came in with a mask, or when I ask them to put one on, they put it on. So we've had 100% compliance. From what I understand, the feedback I ask every week from departments, including the library. So it's not just coming in, it's once they come in, we go up to them right away and say, we feel more comfortable. We encourage you to have a mask. You don't have one. Here's one. Would you put it on? 100% of those people cooperate. So no one's challenged us about not wearing a mask.
So that's really encouraging. I mean, I think all of us in the public should be encouraged that that's the posture that the public is taking. And so at some point, if people are already in compliance, then this might be a solution in search of a problem if we already have compliance. A second question I have, hypothetically, if someone came in and said, look, I know that masks are being recommended, but I don't feel like it's necessary, or for whatever reason, I'm not going to wear a mask. If we had a requirement that only allows entrance to people who would wear a mask, what would enforcement look like?
Okay, well, understand this. You're creating a rule. So a person who comes in doesn't put on a mask is not in violation of any law. They can't be arrested or cited. But they can be asked to leave because they didn't abide by the rule. Either put on the mask or we ask you to leave. If they don't put on the mask, they refuse to leave, then unfortunately the only option we have is to call the police, who can remove them for trespassing. That would be the violation.
Okay.
That's the same thing we have for violation of park rules, when they're rules and not ordinances or laws.
Okay.
The Parks and Rec people, ask them to cease whatever the objectionable action is. If they refuse to do it, police can be brought in, and then they can be removed for trespassing. So that's what we have before us. Not a good alternative. We don't want to put the police in that position, but again, most people have cooperated with us.
And one additional question: if someone says, "Look, you don't get it. I am not going to wear a mask." Are there any government services that they would not have access to because they couldn't come in physically to meet with people? So we have to be very careful when we are denying someone city services. And so if they don't have the ability to access city services in person, we have to make sure there's an alternative way for them to access those services. So as we think about the departments of our city government that would be impacted by alternative one, are there in fact any of those departments or services? I mean, obviously cyber is one, but any other government services that they would not have access to?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, I can think of one off the top of my head is we notarize free of charge for people. That's a service we provide. It's not a mandatory service. People don't need it. It's an extra service, but they could not come in. We could not perform that service remotely, as you might think. But most of the service we can. Now, a lot you rely on people over the internet. So some people don't have the internet, but they usually have phones, and we can help them if they called in, even fill out applications for things. I guess I would hate to say right now there is not one service we couldn't provide them remotely. I just have to think about that before I guarantee that.
Well, when the city hall was locked, people still were able to obtain many or not all of our government services.
Yep.
And
I don't know if everyone was tested at the time, but I'm pretty sure we satisfied everybody to date during those months. I did not receive a complaint that they were being served in any way.
So that's one thing that encourages me, is that having gone through a lockdown period, I think we have some reason for confidence that we could provide government services to those who chose not to wear a mask, and we wanted to enforce this rule. Thanks.
Okay, I see that Keith and Barb are also available.
Yeah, Keith is the other area. Remember we talked about it can't be a total prohibition, because Keith wrote a whole section on recreation activities and what we suggest there. And Barb's here to talk about SIRIDE. Maybe Barb, you got any update on the SIRIDE board?
Sure. So currently SIRIDE we're saying we're expecting passengers to wear face coverings. I feel like the message really has somewhat consistent. Most people are wearing them. We do have enough PPE right now where drivers can give somebody who doesn't have a face mask a face mask. So I sent an email to the board today asking if they were comfortable moving forward with the word required. I think it's still the same intent basically, but I've had a couple of parents email me. So I think we're comfortable moving forward. I think we just need to recognize that there are going to be individuals that have health concerns that doesn't allow them to wear a mask. So what we're telling people is to say the expectation is you wear one. Do you have one? Would you like one?
Barb, I know that SIRIDE ridership has been down. So as you've been doing the expect a mask routine, how many people are actually riding the bus with that kind of expectation?
Currently SIRIDE ridership still is down. We're carrying, normally this time of year, we carry between 4,000 and 5,000 a day. We're carrying about 1,200. I would say probably 95% of the passengers are wearing masks. We've worked closely with ISU's fall planning committee, and in all of the information they're pushing out to faculty, staff, and students, they are saying that mask coverings are required on SIRIDE buses as well. So they're at least sending that message. Does that answer your question, Gloria? Sorry.
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, the typical ridership is like 33,000 a day.
Yeah,
is that right?
When school starts, that's typical. Who knows what typical looks like next year?
Yeah. But so, excuse me, so 95% of a much smaller number right now who are complying, and we have to see what happens once the students are back and maybe riding in a much larger number.
Right.
Agreed, but I do feel like ISU has really worked collaboratively with us to try to get the message out that they're expected on SIRIDE. They're expected, if you're an ISU student, the expectation is that you wear a mask when you're going to class, when you're coming onto campus, when you're riding the bus. And Rachel, maybe you can speak to that as well. But that's what all of their information has said. So I'm hopeful that people will ride them. We're looking for voluntary compliance, obviously.
Then Keith needs to brief you on the recreation programming and expectations there, if that's okay.
And we're doing the same thing, basically what Barb had mentioned, expect people to wear masks. In the council action forum, I did share, we do have some varied compliance, with it. With our fitness class participants, it's a much higher rate of people coming into the facility with the masks on. At the swim lessons and lap swimming, it's higher compliance. Probably the lowest one we have is at the ice arena, and with our hockey, we maybe only have about 50% of the people, are coming in with masks on. But like we mentioned in the council action forum as well, is once people are doing their activity, most of the individuals are not wearing masks when they are actually participating, whether it's skating, a fitness class, whatever it might be. They generally are taking those off.
But we're recommending that according to CDC guidelines, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, because CDC does say, you know, especially with swimming, you should not have a mask on. Get wet, it's a safety hazard. So for sure, we wouldn't want to do that. And then, you know, the high intensity activities. But again, like I mentioned in the council action form, you know, that high intensity or level of intensity is really participant specific. And what may be look like low intensity to me might be high intensity for somebody that, because of their age, you know, physical condition or underlying medical issues. That's something. So we really have, you know, our instructors really work well with the participants. We have had some older adult fitness classes initially where people did start wearing masks, but shortly into the first couple of classes, they were taking them off because they had difficulty breathing. So that's again based on the CDC guidance.
But you have a socially distanced to extreme levels, don't you? I've seen you in the gym, spreading out, limiting the numbers.
Yeah, and we have limited the number of people that we have in classes. We normally have classes up in our aerobics room. We do not have any classes in there. We've moved them all to the gym. Again, limited how many people, so we can really spread out. We have offered, and then last week, Brian, when you asked about moving classes outside, we have offered a number of classes. In fact, before City Hall opened, we were offering yoga classes out in the park. And when we were going inside, Nancy Shaw had conversation with the participants, and all of the yoga participants said, no, we like it outside. We're not ready to move in, so we don't have any yoga classes inside. We've taken some of our youth sport activities, such as Start Smart, and moved that outside. We've taken some of our classes and made them parent-child instead of the instructor having to work closely one-on-one with participants. Now they kind of give instruction, and the parent works with the child and some of that. So we've you know, done a number of different things to try to social distance because again, participants are not wearing masks.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. I think outdoors is totally the way to go. It seems to me like so. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we had 3 different areas: city buildings, including City Hall, but all other buildings, Cyride, and then the recreation activities. We've reported, I think, on all 3 of those areas for you before you make a final decision.
Keith, an alternative 1B says allow staff to determine which parks and recreation activity participants are required to wear face coverings. So would anything change from what you're doing right now if council adopted that option?
Well, I think with that one right now, participants in all of our activities aren't wearing them. But once we go indoors, so once we get to October, November, we're going to have to come indoors. You know, we may say like a yoga part or yoga class, we may be able to move up into the aerobics room, and we may not have as much room to social distance. So we would say, you know, yoga participants, you should wear masks, or you need to wear masks because we can't social distance. It might be, you know, I gave some other examples, but we might have like a Sylvan class where they're working robotics or coding or something. Again, no high intensity. They might be working closely together with each other, can't social distance, require them to wear masks. So in this one, we're saying, you know, allow staff to kind of make that determination where if we can't social distance, we'll require masks, but if we can social distance, we wouldn't.
And then we had seen Susan. I was going to ask her to give an update on our Cyclone Cares initiative. I see she's dropped off. I don't know if she can get back on or not, but she's been doing a great job leading the communication effort. And if she can come back on before we adjourn, it'd be nice to give you an update. But we're really trying to get that message across, and they're going to start launching some informational campaigns in concert with Iowa State, with Ames School District, the Chamber of Commerce, and to some extent Mary Greeley also. So I want to defer to her to let you know what's going on. Go ahead, Lori, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question for Steve about item C on alternatives 1 and 2, where the staff will make face coverings available. Do we have enough of a supply of both masks and face shields to do that?
We said we could get face shields too. Now, we're not going to open up tomorrow. That's why I've got to make sure we have enough face shields. We have enough masks right now, but we may need, we've ordered them, but you know how that works now. So we're not going to open until we have a sufficient number of face shields also. Because some people will say medically they can't wear the mask, so we want to give them another option. Could be for employees too. So we will, I think we're going to have those on hand before we open up. Or require them, excuse me.
Hey, I was just going to let you know that Susan's computer crashed. So she's trying to get back in. If she can get back in, she'll give you an update. But that's why she's not on right now.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Mayor, I can give a little bit of an update, and Susan could fill in some of the detail. We do have access to a number of the Cyclones Care templates to be able to use throughout the city buildings and different places. We know there are businesses that are already adapting to those, to that signage and using that as well. Some different organizations. I know the chamber is one of them, and we want that consistency in that messaging. So we are striving to start using those signs and pushing those out on our social media platforms as well as within our buildings and throughout the city. So I don't believe there's another meeting set up yet for all those communicators, but if there's a need that arises, Susan can pull them together pretty quickly so we can discuss any next steps that anybody may see.
Yeah, there's Susan. I think you're back on, aren't you, Susan?
Yeah, I made it back. I'm not sure what just happened. Sounds like I just caught the tail end. It sounds like Deb was kind of summarizing the Cyclones Care campaign and where we're at. Was there a specific question, or did you get it all covered?
I think it's just important for council to have a broad-based understanding of what we're doing and who all is the participants. I think Deb kind of gave a little bit of an idea where we're at. I know the chamber is really rolling things out. I just think that one of the things that we have talked about in a larger group is consistency of message across all the different entities, and then having co-branding. And we even talked about if there were any signboards on the side of Cyride that would have everybody's logo. It wouldn't just be one or two. It would be everyone's logo. Mary Greeley Medical Center, it would be Iowa State, it would be City of Ames, Chamber of Commerce, on and on and on. For the idea being that, hey, to communicate, we all want you to be doing this. And so I think the key becomes, I know Steve Sullivan joined us last time at a meeting from the hospital. So maybe just kind of who are the players and what's the timing, I guess, in terms of rolling it out? What can council expect from the city standpoint?
Sure. As we said before, we've gotten 100% agreement with the 4 basic pillars of healthy public choices. The idea of hand washing, social distancing, wearing a face covering, and staying home if you're ill. There have been no concerns about those 4. They're depicted in symbols, so they're easy to understand quickly if you see them. And we've had a broad-based support from organizations all across the city, from United Way to the school district to our healthcare organizations, ISU Research Park. It's League of Women Voters. So we've got a lot of people on board, a lot of people agreeing that this is the way to go. We are currently seeking those contracts with places like Hawk Advertising that does the Cyride bus boards. We're looking at billboards, print, lots of different ways to get the words out, but also using those communication tools that those organizations already have access to. For example, last week, our Parks and Recreation newsletter, which goes out to about 10,000 households, sent out the Cyclone Cares universal poster with the 4 healthy pillars on it. And so that's a dribble. And then we posted it online over the weekend. and on our own Facebook page. We reached about 10,000 people through our Facebook post, and we got about 250 likes on it, about 70 comments. This is high traffic for our social media. We have multiple social media channels, so we'll pick a new one and we'll send it out on a different social media channel each day. What I see it happening is that Iowa State has kind of going full speed right now, and the other organizations will start trickling in. And as we all get on board and we all start pushing the message out, you'll start seeing it. Maybe subtly, you'll see it everywhere. I mean, it would be great if you see it everywhere you look, but you see it on a bus board, and then you see it in the display at the North Grand Mall, and then you see it on your Twitter feed. So the idea would be you just constantly be seeing it. We'd all be doing it at different times. This is not a sprint. We're looking at several months of this messaging going on. And so the bus boards might be up from August through November, that kind of thing. And so the actual timing of it really depends on when the organization has the option to use the tool. I think I had shown some of you the next city side, which goes out August 1st to the August 31st, will feature the 4 pillars of healthy choices on the front. So that's the kind of thing. You'll just keep getting it drip, drip, drip until it just becomes second nature. Not that you ignore it, because we change it up, we use different images, but you see that's the expectation, not just on campus, but community-wide.
And we are pleased that North Grand Mall joined in too, right?
Yeah, yep. So we got access to the assets. So all the creative stuff that Iowa State is making, they basically open sourced it last week. And so people are just kind of starting now to get their hands on it and trying to figure out where it might fit with, I've got a newsletter going out, I've got an e-newsletter going out, I've got a post I can, stick it in. The school district, I talked to them today, they have digital signage in their buildings. They were talking about, okay, when could they put that in their buildings? And so, you may see some of it, you may see, pieces of it, you may see a lot of it. It may be more subtle than you realize, but there'll be a lot of different tools being used. And again, the idea is to sustain it over multiple months.
So this is I don't really like to get into how things are run in City Hall, but I have a question, Steve, and it's a philosophical one. And that is, when the public comes in, even though we have, let's say at the utility counter, even though we have plexiglass screens, would the optics be better and consistent with the message that we're trying to send out if somebody would put a mask on before they started talking to somebody? Maybe not wearing it all the time, because when they're working there, they could potentially take it off. I know I've gone into a bank the last couple of days. They actually have plexiglass screens up, but they also have the tellers are wearing masks also. And I'm not saying throughout all of City Hall, I'm just thinking about the optics to try and reinforce our message. But it's a question, not a, this is what we should definitely do. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think the optics would be better for that, I think, obviously.
I think we have received at least one email about, I think I took it as mostly optics, not so much a complaint about what's being done in City Hall, but just observations about where masks were being worn and where they weren't being worn. And, if the citizens are noticing that, then clearly that is an issue of optics.
Yeah. Well, I think when you get into like, if you have, like in Steve's office, if you have if just Steve's there by himself, or you have just one other person, they're 10, 12 feet away, you're socially distancing. Or you have a big conference room and you have 2 or 3 people, in the conference room. And that also is CDC guideline is, 6 feet. Like it says, wear a mask or face coverings when you can't socially distance inside. But I'm just trying to think through. We don't want to send a wrong message and say we have to do this, but we're not going to do it. Again, I know you're doing the CDC guidelines for the at the counters. It's just it's purely an optics question.
Mayor, I have a question for Barb. Yeah, Barb, I appreciated your comments on the styride use now. It seems like with the bus situation, it's different than City Hall or the library. if there was a situation where the bus driver looked back in the mirror and there was someone who came in with a mask but now has taken it off, what would be reasonable that we would ask the bus driver to do in that situation?
That's a difficult question. That's one that we continue to work through. I don't think there's an easy answer. I think my expectation at this point, honestly, would be not to address it. I mean, we've asked them, they had it on. We don't know everybody's underlying medical condition. I don't know everything that's happening. I think you have to think about the safety of the drivers as well. As Steve said, it's not necessarily an enforceable requirement. I mean, it's not against the law at this point to not wear a face covering. So I guess I don't expect drivers to police people with regards if they take it off on the bus, I guess.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments for staff? Right, Brian, are you, who's hosting right now? Is that you, Deb, or?
Keith and I are.
Okay, I think we have a couple of, we have 3 attendees. I would just open up public comment if anyone wants to make a comment on this before we go ahead and make any kind of motion. So anyone raising their hands that would be interested in addressing council on this, and if not, we'll move on.
No one is raising their hand at this time.
Okay, we'll close public input. All right, council.
I would move alternative 1.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Amber.
Second.
Okay. Discussion.
So, I'm going to vote no on this because we've had staff explanations tonight that we have on City Hall and our library excellent compliance with masks. And so what we should do is pass ordinances that make a difference. I'm also very concerned about the enforcement aspect of this. I think we're trying to fix something that isn't broken at this point.
And I share some of Tim's concerns, and I expressed most of them last meeting when we were putting this on the agenda. But, you know, I actually take a lot of comfort in what we've heard tonight too, because from the renewed fact that we have 100% compliance, and if we project that going forward, I find it really difficult to understand what the difference is between expecting masks and requiring masks when everyone is putting on a face covering. So I don't see it being a change that is really going to make things a lot harder for anyone. I also haven't heard anyone explain that the enforcement profile would be radically different than it is currently. So at one level, maybe it is a solution looking for a problem, but on the other hand, I don't think it changes things that much. And I do appreciate that there is tremendous value in consistency and simplicity of messaging. And that's kind of what tips the scales for me. I think that it's just so much easier to say that, like, everyone in Ames, all the big organizations in Ames agree that this is what we're going to do and not have to get into the nuanced differences. So I like that. I also feel that saying something stronger on SIRIDE is particularly important. You know, people have to get on quickly. There's not a lot of time to cajole people into understanding the policy or, you know, that sort of thing. And there are no reasonable alternatives to SIRIDE for people who want to go somewhere. So, so I'm going to support this.
Gloria, just for clarification, under 1A, that's required in all city buildings. Is that as we described, we're operationalizing that now?
Yeah, I think that I agree with the mayor about the optics of not having people who are interfacing with the public wearing their masks. And you're not operationalizing that aspect, right?
No, I'm not. But,
so go ahead, Steve.
But I'm willing to go back to talk to the staff. We have a whole team that works on this and talk about the optics. I just want to know if you're directing us to do it, or you understand we could proceed the way we're doing it now, or maybe take under advisement what you're talking about the optics.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm happy to let you handle it because I do think so far we're getting the compliance. My main concern is the same one that David has: consistency of messaging.
Right.
And so I think that's really what's extremely important here.
Okay.
I didn't go to the utility counter, but I went in City Hall last week for the first time for months. Every employee that I came in, when I walked into the city clerk's office, immediately Amy put on a mask. Diane put on a mask before I walked into her office. So I think staff are being sensitive to the fact of that, even in office, locations. And I was wearing a mask when I walked in, and just wore a mask until I got in my office, and then put it back on again when I left. So I think they'll understand. I think especially trying to say we're trying to be consistent in messaging, and will be very, very beneficial. So, any other comments or any discussion before we vote? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining?
Nay.
All right. Motion passes 5-1 with Garten voting nay.
One follow-up, Steve, can we just work under the presumption that if you become aware of any services that are not accessible to people who refuse to wear a mask, that you would bring that to our attention?
Yes. More than that, I'll take care of it myself to make sure we do provide it if we have to handle everything. But yes, we find we're getting complaints. People just call us if they think we are not be able to provide the service they need. We'll take care of it. But we'll identify it for you too.
Okay. Anything else, Steve or Deb, that you want direction from council tonight on this item?
I don't think so. I think we got everything.
All right, very good. Let's move on to disposition of communications to council. We have two items. One's a memo from Brian requesting direction from council to staff regarding how to proceed with special events occurring this fall.
Brian, still on? Brian, you there?
Yes, I'm there.
You want any direction or clarification for them?
Yes. So since the spring, we really have not received applications for events, and we recently received a package from Ames Main Street, including 5 events occurring later this fall and into the winter. And we would simply like to know what the council's direction is for us. Should we accept these applications and evaluate them? And if so, should we evaluate them against the criteria that the council discussed back in May for the COVID-19 precautions? Or is it the council's expectations that those not be followed? Or does the council want to give us some different direction? So 3 of these events appear to be primarily just free parking. And so it's probably not going to be an issue when we compare it against the COVID-19 precautions. 2 of these events are more festival type events, and we would have to dig into the details of them with the event organizers. But if the council has any preliminary direction for us about how to approach these, that would be helpful.
Well,
Brian.
And you mentioned, free parking events. Of course, that their application for parking will be measured against our current parking policy, right? And it's kind of unknown how that will turn out. It depends on the details. But I guess I would move to have staff evaluate these and put them on an agenda for us to talk about.
Is there a second?
Second.
Gloria, all right. Discussion?
So when I look at these dates, I'm thinking, I really appreciate the fact that Main Street has brought these forward as early as they have, because I'm the one who has been asking for that to happen. Unfortunately, in this particular instance, we don't know what's going to be happening with COVID as we get closer to the fall. So I don't see any reason that we shouldn't be reviewing these, but I wonder about, our ability to say, we have to cancel this event should there be COVID conditions that would be mandating to us that it's not safe for those events to occur. So I don't have a problem with reviewing them. I don't have a problem with staff using the criteria that we established, but I want us to maintain that ability in the future as we get closer to the dates to say we can't do this.
All right, everyone understand the motion? Those in
Just
favor?
so that I have,
Go ahead.
sorry, this is Brian. Just so I have clarity, when you're directing staff to evaluate these, is it against these COVID precautions, or is it simply against the typical event evaluation criteria? How we would evaluate?
I intended to evaluate against both sets of criteria.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Sure.
Okay. And I presume Aaron will get that in the motion accordingly. All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Okay. And then the second item is communications from Gene Cressy.
That's it. I think it's just information. But Deb, you have anything to add?
So this is just the kind of the year-end report on the fiscal year 20 contract that the city had with United Way to allocate dollars to human service organizations who had capital projects that they were looking for funding for. So it's just the wrap-up report.
So it's done. The project's done now. The program's done. They're actually returning about $31,000 back to the fund.
Yep, they've already returned those funds, and we did use a little over $20,000 of those funds for the special request that the Emergency Residence Project came forward with a couple of months ago to expand the use of hotel rooms for the homeless population. So some of those dollars have already been expended.
Yep. Okay. So no action required.
Correct.
All right. Moving on to council comments. David, we'll start with you tonight.
Nothing for me tonight. Thank you.
Tim?
Yes, I have, I sent an email to council regarding potential partnership with the schools and Parks and Rec. I don't know what the level of interest would be from our schools, but we have some examples of communities that are trying to be more intentional in partnering with local schools to make their parks available, given the COVID conditions and the value of being outside when we can. And so the motion that I would like to make is I move that the city staff reach out to all the schools serving Ames children. That would be the Ames Public Schools, Gilbert Public Schools, St. Cecilia, Ames Christian, to see if they have an interest in using our city parks for outdoor learning, facilitating social distancing, and being outside while the weather permits.
Second.
All right. Seconded by Brown. Discussion?
Is that reaching out to the individual schools or reaching out to the school boards?
Well, I would defer to staff in terms of their lines of communication.
Yeah, we'll communicate with the superintendents, I believe.
Okay. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried.
That's all tonight. Thank you.
Rachel? Gloria?
I had the opportunity to participate in a webinar yesterday that was a briefing for Capitol Hill and the next coronavirus aid package. And I was happy to be able to highlight the Cyclone Cares program as one of the ways in which we're using our partnerships to try and address COVID in the absence of a state mandate for mask wearing. And so I was very happy that I could contribute that element. Also to talk about the situation of Ames. The Capitol Hill briefing focused on college towns and was guided by the National League of Cities. And if any of you are interested, I can send you the links to the press coverage so you can see what the various participants talked about. That's it.
Thank you. Amber?
Nothing for me.
Wrong one.
Nothing for me tonight.
Thank you. All right, just a few brief comments. One is council, you directed last week to send a letter to the governor requesting that we be given or she would delegate the authority that if we wanted to mandate masks in the city, work together with staff. And actually, I think Brian knocked that letter out in one day and we got it actually sent out on Wednesday. So I think you got a copy of that, but anyway, it did go out, and I have not heard it back. It was also, I think it was emailed as well as sent by regular mail as well. And then you also saw that Mark sent out the letter to the bar owners, and Steve, do you have any update on that?
I sent out the letter. No, I'm going to send out the letter on Friday about the procedures we're going to use past the notification of the bars, how we're going to operationalize that. But the second step is I've got notification the police have hand delivered the letter to the bar managers also, and actually have engaged in conversations with them. So we're getting good response. I think they're aware of their obligations. They're a little concerned, as rental properties are sometimes, that they can't control everyone's behavior, and they hate to be closed down because a few people got out of hand and violated their own rules. So you'll see we're trying to lay out a process where we would come out and we would try to work through warnings and working with the actual bar owners to give them maybe an opportunities to maybe have a failure once in a while. We work with them, so give them warning. In other words, I think they appreciate that. I think they're going to try to do the best they can. I think they understand it. So we're past the second step now. So I'll give you a full report on Friday.
Okay. Also, the chamber typically has a fly-in to Washington, D.C. every year. That usually is in May, where we go to visit with Senator Grassley, Senator Ernst, USDA, and then try and pick up some of our House representatives at times. They're actually having what they call a virtual fly-in this year, and it's going to be not next week, but the following week. And they've already had meetings set up with Senator Ernst and Senator Grassley. And so if you have any points that you would like me to communicate to either of them, please shoot me an email. I'll make sure that I raise them. Typically, I'm afforded the opportunity to address both of them on behalf of the city, early on in the conversation. I'm starting to formulate some thoughts on what to share with them in terms of concerns. But anyway, just wanting to make you aware of that. I'll participate. I think that's August. I think it's 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 3rd, 4th, and 5th. I think it is something like that. So anyway, and last week we had 2 Story County emergency management meetings. One was our quarterly meeting. And I think I've bragged before about how tremendous a team we have that works together on the Story County emergency management, and their staff is just amazing. And a lot of the mayors get together. We had a lot of good conversation. That was Wednesday night, and then Thursday night we had our weekly update with the mayors and the public health and also the communications and chamber, and we had a lengthy conversation with the chamber regarding just issues, and also talking about the schools and talking about masks and communications we talked about tonight as well. But and Iowa State is a key player, key partner, and they're just, I mean, I just can't say enough positive things about the way that people in this community, county, surrounding communities are working together. I mean, there's you don't see much of it, and we don't really do a very good job of singing our song, honestly, or tooting our horn. But I just want you to know that there are people that are committed to really trying to minimize the spread of COVID, and they're very concerned about what's going on and doing what we can. So I think that what you passed tonight is a very good message to reinforce that. And you probably have noticed around the state, Waukee just closed down their city hall, their city buildings. They're shutting back down again. And some other ones are. I think Johnson might have done that as well too. But the point is that because of the growth and the spread of the virus, people are starting to restrict back or close down. So we're still in the first wave. But anyway, and last but not least, Thursday night is the last of the 4 NAACP community discussions. Starts at 6 or promptly at 7, and it'll be featuring Dr. Winterstein and me, and Dan Culhane will be the moderator. And we've received the questions to kind of help us understand, what they're going to be asking, and they had some really good questions that we're getting prepared to respond to. So I encourage everyone to listen. The last 3 have been outstanding, have been very good, very informational, and hopefully the community feels the same way. With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
Okay, we are adjourned this evening. Have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next Tuesday night. Good night.
Hi, everyone.
Bye-bye.